As the event known as the Great Awakening progressed, one preacher stood out from the crowd. His name was George Whitefield. George Whitefield was born in 1714 in the small town of Gloucester, in the southern part of England, 102 miles from London.
Well, George was born to two wonderful parents, Thomas Whitefield and Elizabeth Edwards. The Whitefields ran an inn in the town, and as he was growing up, he developed a strong sense of passion for acting in theater, and you can bet that later in his life it helped him with his reenactments of Bible stories during his preaching. During his younger years while at the school, he was anything but religious. According to Whitefield himself, he was addicted to lying, cursing, and making crude jokes. He also skipped church most Sundays and was quite the ladies' man.
Whitefield continued his education at the Crypt School of Gloucester until he was 15 years old. Up until this point, he became known as quite the scholar, and was selected to recite speeches before the Corporation of Gloucester, who were a group of businessmen who dominated the upper class of the city. At age 15, he dropped out of school to help his mother run the family inn. Whitefield himself said, "At this time, I put on my blue apron, washed cups, cleaned rooms, and in one word, became a professed common drawer for nigh a year and a half." This, however, did not last long. His mother's business at the Bell did not flourish, and she finally retired from it altogether. Around this time, one of his old friends revived his mind and persuaded him to go to college, and so he did.
When he turned 18, he made his journey to the heart of England, Oxford. Whitefield's residence at Oxford was a great turning point in his life. Prior to that, he had been hardly religious, but as schooling continued, his love for Christianity deepened. Around that time, he became friends with two other devout Christians, John and Charles Wesley. They, along with a few other people, became what we know as the First Methodists, because of their method of living.
At the early age of 22, Whitefield was admitted to be ordained by Bishop Benson of Gloucester on Trinity Sunday, 1736. His ordination was not of his own seeking. The bishop heard of his character from Lady Selwyn and others, and sent for him. He gave him 5 guineas to buy books, and offered to ordain him whenever he wished. Of this, Whitefield wrote in his journal that, "I began to think that if I held out longer, I should fight against God." From there, he moved throughout England, preaching and teaching the good news of Jesus Christ. And in 1737, he was offered to visit the small colony in America known as Georgia.
George did much preaching while in Georgia, and built a reputation for himself throughout the colonies. But after a year, he decided to head back to England, where he discovered everyone hated him. In England, he discovered that his position was no longer what it used to be before he sailed to Georgia. Most members of the clergy no longer favored him, and others outright denounced him. You see, this was due to his beliefs on the doctrine of regeneration.
The doctrine of regeneration that Whitefield was preaching says that God brings Christians into a new life, or they are born again from a previous state of separation from God and subjection to the decay of death. This doctrine was not very popular at the time, but became so due in part to Whitefield's teachings. After finding a less than welcoming return party for him in England, he found that there weren't many spots for him to preach. He turned to preach in the open air, seeing that thousands everywhere would attend no place of worship, spent their Sundays in idleness or sin, and were not to be reached by sermons within walls. He resolved, in the spirit of holy aggression, to go out after them into the highways and hedges on his master's principles, and compel them to come in.
You see, in the year of our Lord 1739, Whitefield had gone to Islington to preach for the vicar, his friend Mr. Stonehouse. That's with the V. In the midst of the prayer, the church wardens came to him and demanded his license for preaching in the area surrounding London. It's a big area. Whitefield, of course, had not got his license, so to continue his sermon, he went outside after the communion service and preached in the courtyard amidst the roses. From that day forward, he became a constant field preacher, whenever weather and the season of the year made it possible.
Whitefield's history from this period to the day of his death are almost entirely one of repetition. One year was just like another, and to attempt to follow him would be only going repeatedly over the same ground. From 1739 to the year of his death, 1770, a period of 31 years, His life was one of uniform employment, and he was always about his master's business. He visited Scotland 14 times. He crossed the Atlantic 7 times, backward and forward in miserable slow sailing ships, and arrested the attention of thousands in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. He went over to Ireland twice, and on one occasion was almost murdered by an ignorant popish mob in Dublin. He visited almost every church and town in all of Wales and England. He died at last, very suddenly, at Newburyport in North America on Sunday, the 29th of September, 1770, at the comparatively early age of 56. He was once married to a widow named James of Abergavenny, who died before him. If we may judge from the little mention made of his wife in his letters, his marriage does not seem to have contributed much to his happiness. He left no children, but he left a name far better than that of sons and daughters. He left a legacy.